one possible response to all this is the disengagement from technology. Let's close our computers and put down our phones and move to the woods and have sustainable farming or something like that. And you propose, as you've just been talking about, a way in which we might find meaning in a world where it's not going to be coming through work. So we're just sort of stipulating here that most of us are going to be technologically unemployed, and the robots are going to be doing most of the things that we formerly found meaning and value. And you say maybe we can find meaning and value in these virtual worlds. Now, again, you get into a lot of this in great detail, but if I can try to summarize what I imagine a lot of people are thinking when they hear that is, well, there's just something about using our attention to connect up with things that are real, the real world and the soil between our fingers and the smell of trees and so forth. And if we spend a lot of time in these virtual reality worlds, how on earth could that be conducive to our well-being? Because we'd be in some sense dissociated from that which is real. One way this sometimes gets expressed, and you talk about this in the book, is in terms of Nozick's famous thought experiment, which is called the experience machine. So the idea is that people imagine that they're plugged into some kind of virtual reality world.
Like this.
Right. There you go. Yeah. And it feels from the inside as though you're happy, and you're undergoing hedonic states perhaps that you might like. But many people have the intuition that there's something just structurally wrong with the whole thing because you aren't, as it were, in touch with reality. So we're going to have to do maybe a little bit of metaphysics in a short period of time here to talk about the different sorts of reality that we could be invoking here when we speak this way. And you do talk about that at length in the book. In fact, that was one of the most enjoyable parts of the book, I thought, is what do we mean when we say that something real? It's kind of the bullshitty conversation you have with your roommates at midnight, in college. But there's some very interesting philosophical questions raised by that. So could you talk a little bit about how you would respond to those kinds of objections, that if we spend all this time in virtual reality worlds, there's no way that's going to be ultimately conducive to our flourishing because we won't have maintained our connection with reality.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so as you say, like the stereotypical conception or the popular conception of virtual reality is something like this, plugging into a headset and getting absorbed in a computer generated or simulated world. But like one of the things I do in the chapter on virtual worlds is have this lengthy metaphysical discussion of what is reality. It's going to be impossible to condense that into a 2 or 3 minute description or conversation, but I'll try my best. But like one of the main headlines or takeaways from that is that different kinds of objects have different kinds of reality or conditions of reality attached to them. So I mean, let's just give one example. Are we having a real conversation right now, even though we are communicating through digital technology, through representations of one another on the screen? I'm not really physically in a room with you. I'm looking at a 2-dimensional representation of you on my laptop screen. I think we'd say that this is still a real conversation, even though it is heavily mediated through a computer environment. And I think as well, by the way, if we were having a conversation in a VR environment that you get with one of these devices where we're communicating through avatars, not, photorealistic representations of one another, we'd also be having a real conversation. So one of the points that I make in the book is a lot of things that people talk about taking place in computer-generated environments or digital environments are in fact real. Okay. But I also argue, conversely, a lot of things that happen in the quote-unquote real physical world are not real because they involve some kind of fictional representation or projection onto that world. It's a lot of like the social reality that we experience, like the social roles that we ascribe to people, the social statuses that we ascribe to people, marriage, money, things like this. They're not real in any kind of meaningful sense, or they don't have a, let's say,
not in a concrete physical sense.
Not in a concrete physical sense. They are rather like functional kinds, or that they perform a certain function in society. They're social constructions. There's an element of this imaginative projection onto the physical reality that we experience. So that's right. One of the points. And like, so one of the big arguments that I make in the book about virtual worlds is that one of the things that makes a type of existence virtual is that it is, in some sense, contingent or not necessary, that it involves a game-like element. So I go into a very long discussion of what a game is based on the work of another philosopher called Bernard Suits, and he argues that a game is in essence the assumption of some kind of voluntary obstacle in your life, right? So for example, was one of the illustrations that comes from his book, is that suppose you had a robot that could build a house for you very simply, or at the click of your fingers, a house could be constructed for you. But despite the fact that you have this technology available to you, you decide, no, I'm going to actually build the house myself. I'm going to source the materials, lay the bricks, lay the foundation, put up the roof. I'm doing it in the wrong order. You can tell I'm not a builder. But that would, what he argues is that would actually be then to turn house building into a game. Because you didn't need to do it. There was a more efficient means of doing it available to you, but you chose the less efficient means because maybe you derived some kind of personal satisfaction from that. And so to kind of bring it all around, you mentioned at the outset, some people talk about, we need this kind of connection to the physical world. We need to retreat to the cabin in the woods, live by the lake, contemplate nature, feel the soil between our fingers on a daily basis. Well, sure, we can do that, and that can be a type of virtual existence. But the reality is, like, that type of existence, that was lauded by these kind of mid 1800s idealist philosophers in the US, or people like Thoreau, that was only possible because they lived a relatively privileged lifestyle where they were freed from many of the necessities of day-to-day living. So
Thoreau was like living in the backyard of Emerson or something, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's also discussions again that he lived pretty close to his, I think his sister and his mother or something. They did a lot of his cooking and cleaning and things like that. Yeah, so there's a interesting feminist critique of that whole literature as well. And
the self-made man out there, tackling nature by his own resources. Yeah.